And we are just thrilled and honored to give Matthew the Hector Leonardo Art and Inspiration Award.
Well, thank you all for coming down here today. Really appreciate it, especially with the weather being the way it was. But yeah, I'm so very, very grateful to be part of this festival, be accepted into this festival. Very grateful again for all you guys to come out this way. And you know, really, I might be taking home the physical award today, but this is really for my Uncle Hank. You know, without him, this documentary wouldn't be a thing. He's been producing art for nearly 3 times longer than I've been on this planet. And it's really his spirit that we're honoring tonight with this award. It's his defiance of nature, of age, of all the elements that are working against him at being now almost 90 years old and still producing and still working his butt off. So this is really, you know, this is truly an award for Hank Vergona. So I'm happy to accept it on his behalf. But yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And I hope you enjoy the movie.
And Matthew will do a Q&A with our Andrew Botsford right after the film, so please stay. That'll be most enjoyable.
So, really great film about a really great guy.
Thank you.
So, are you a filmmaker by trade?
I actually originally went to art school myself to be an illustrator. I went to the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn with a major in illustration. And I worked a little bit in the field doing production art and doing a lot of freelance stuff. But eventually I got pushed into the video path, just kind of happened organically. I started a YouTube page in 2009, and I wanted to make video content for a specific niche market that was out there, and that kind of led me to go deeper into the rabbit hole and eventually start doing deeper things, working in TV, and then eventually making full-length docs of my own.
So how many docs have you made before or since this one?
Well, this one was the first. Oh, sorry, this was the first. The very first one was 2012, and that was about an all-female kickboxing gym on the Jersey Shore. Yeah, so it's a pretty big leap to go from that to this, but that was kind of the first one. And then I did a short about he's a male ballet dancer, 6'3", 200 and something pounds, big dude. And we did a little short about body positivity. And I also worked with another producer named Steven Kepfer, who's a Sambo instructor, which is a Russian martial art. And he's also a stuntman working in TV and some film. And we did a docu-short about the New York stunt acting community. So that's pretty much been it for this. I mean, I've done some other docu-shorts for various websites I've worked for, or my own websites. And I think that kind of wanted me to, that kind of gave me the urge to want to do a little bit bigger things like this.
Now, did you have a substantial relationship with your uncle prior to deciding to do the film?
Yeah, it used to be, when I'd go visit my grandparents, my parents would send me upstairs to go visit Hank, basically get me out of their hair, send me up to the artist and talk art. And that's usually what we do. We would draw together, paint together. He always likes to tell people, if he was here today, he'd probably tell you all the same thing, too, that me going to art school was the biggest mistake I could have done. He might not be wrong. Yeah, but we used to, go up there, hang out. And it was interesting, kind of, being that little kid who, he kind of sees me as all these years versus now being this adult that's making a movie about him. And even that was kind of a whole process to get that to actually happen. But it was, we had one, I feel like, a kind of different relationship from how I was when I was a little kid versus how we are now. It's kind of grown and it's evolved.
But he seemed very open to the process. Was that true, or was that some heavy lifting for you?
The smile says no. It was quite a lot of heavy lifting. Even just getting him to actually agree to let me film him was a whole several month-long process. The idea kind of began when he was actually in the hospital, probably, I don't know how many months it was before we started filming, but he's in the hospital because he had a really bad fall. And I went and kind of just ran the idea by him, and he kind of just ignored it. And he would continue to ignore it for a few months until I visited him one day, and it's kind of like really locked him down and said, hey, I'd really like to do this. And as soon as I mentioned that to him, he took a little piece of paper and started writing down a bunch of names on it. And he handed me this piece of paper with about 8 names, and he said, see these names? These are all the people who said they're going to do a movie about me, and none of them have. And I don't want to waste my time. I'm too old for this. I got a lot of things I want to do. If you want to do this, you got to convince me. So he said, come back in a week and convince me. So I went home. I read his book again. I watched whatever little I could find on YouTube out there. Because there's not much. There's like one little short about him that one of his studio neighbors, Andrew, did about him. There's a few articles about him from like the 1980s, 93 or something, from NPR, from New York Times, various sources. And I just dove headfirst into the life and career of Hank Vergona and tried to really figure out what it is that he's been doing. That was his biggest thing, too, is if I'm going to do this about him, he wanted me to understand his art as much as I possibly could. So I went back to him a week later. I had this basically like 8-page handwritten essay I did about him and read it off to him. And he just kind of sat there like, that's kind of right, but not really. But okay, it's good enough for now. And that was when he basically said yes, and we began filming literally that same day.
And how did you get to all the sources that were shot and quoted about him?
So those are all his studio neighbors.
All studio neighbors.
Or former studio neighbors. Howard now lives in Jersey. He used to be in that studio with Hank for probably about 20 or something years, I think it was. But everybody else in there is current day neighbors of his, except for also Paul Solomon, who lives in Massachusetts. Like I like to tell people this was, you've heard of micro-budget docs. This was a no-budget documentary because all I had to do was get a subway ride over to Manhattan. For Paul, that was like the big expense because I had to take a train out to Massachusetts. So that's where the big money went. But otherwise, it was just, quick little train ride out to Union Square and start shooting.
Oh, well, it's amazing. And the unanimity of people's opinions of Hank and their understanding of what he was doing and what drives him really helped to make the picture, to complete the whole thing, from both his own discussions of his search and his process, as well as the way they saw it and understood it. You got the feeling that he made himself clear to them, as you did for us in the film, and they were very, very helpful. Just a quick filmmaking thing. The decision to score it with all that jazz behind it the whole time, was that early on or was that later on in post? How did that come about?
Well, I always knew I wanted to have some jazz music in it. Hank doesn't often listen to music. When he does, it's either classical or jazz. And I thought classical might be a little bit too boring for this. You're watching an artist sit there and do this for 90 minutes. It's going to be tough to sit through that, I felt like. So I wanted some energy. So I went with the jazz route. And originally, I was going to probably just use some stock music, but there was actually a jazz musician who I really, really liked that I was introduced to from a friend in Japan. And he was listening to this guy's music. His name is Rio Fukui. And I looked up who this guy was and read a little bit about his story. And his story kind of mirrored my uncle's story in a lot of ways. He's this guy who lives in Japan, in Sapporo, Japan, and he just wants to play jazz music. That's his big dream, and he did pretty well for himself, but eventually he's just like, I don't really want to do this whole record-making stuff, I just want to make music. And he spent most of his career just in this tiny little nightclub, essentially, that eventually his wife bought. And he just wanted to play music, and that's what he did until he passed away, and I think it was 2017 or something. So I thought that was really a perfect thematic fit as well, and I really love this guy's music. So through that Japanese friend of mine, we were able to talk to his wife, and she gave us the rights to use the music, and she was like, please make this beautiful movie about this beautiful person and use my husband's music. And that's where the majority of the music was from. The other part of it was actually a gentleman from upstate New York who was a friend of my typography teacher at Pratt. And he introduced me to him, and he was really, he watched the movie first, he fell in love with it. He watched it 3 more times before he called me and talked to me about it. And so that gentleman is from the David Cass Trio. And we just got some really great music, really lucked out, I feel like, with a lot of that stuff.
Well, it was beautiful, and the fact that it was consistent. It wasn't the same music, but that it was behind everybody's talking, and then, I thought it worked beautifully to keep the spirit alive in the film of what they were talking about. I think it really enhanced it. A lot of what they talk about in it is the pursuit of it. And I think that there was one thing that grabbed me the most, and it sort of seemed to be almost a consensus, was that it is the constant pursuit. The pursuit itself is it. And when they got to talking about why has he not been more successful in a sort of a commercial sense or being more widely known, and that goes back to the same thing for most people in a lot of the creative arts, is it's about the process, it's not about the result. And if you're focused on the result, you'll never get the process down. It won't have the meaning or anything else. But there is shot through it in everything that he says, and also backed up by the neighbors, was the spiritual content of what he's doing. I mean, it starts out with the art is God made visible, and then we get to the idea that there's something divine, something spiritual in this process, and in capturing what it is that these people are, and and then talking about connection, which is interesting because that seems to be a theme that's developing in this festival. There was a couple of films today that were about connection, and last night the Terrence McNally documentary is all of his plays that he's been writing. He's been trying to get at the need for human connection, and what do you connect to, sort of as a spiritual as well as a human connection, and certainly in all of your uncle's work, capturing those people, those personalities, those things, was a big deal to it. So, but he doesn't have an orthodox religion of any kind. He doesn't go to church. He doesn't do anything like that, or he doesn't have a philosophy of religion other than the art.
Well, as you mentioned, he originally thought about being a priest.
Right, exactly. I thought that was wonderful, the monastic existence that really appealed to him.
It's a very monastic existence that he still lives to this day. And it's actually kind of funny because he lives in that house you guys saw. He lives upstairs. His brother lived downstairs with his wife, and they both were extremely religious people. So in fact, my grandfather was very, very involved in the church down there. Like until he passed away, he was basically a neighborhood celebrity, and people still know who he is to this day because of how involved he was in the local church. Whereas Hank, not so much. In fact, when my grandfather passed away and it was just my grandmother downstairs and Hank upstairs, she would always get on his case, like, how come he doesn't go to church on Sundays? And that was like her big thing. He didn't go to church. So, but no, I mean, his spirituality really is his art. His prayers are the paintings, what he does all the time, making the work. That's how he's getting in touch with whatever spirituality it is that he has.
Yeah, that and also the practice. I mean, you talk about a Zen practice or any kind of an art practice, and the fact that he has that routine, and everybody said that what keeps him going is getting up, and going to the studio, and coming back and making and the commute is almost as much of the practice as anything else.
Oh yeah,
and I mean, not only because he's making drawings on the subway, but just because it is that practice, that routine, that sort of that ritualized behavior.
And I have to say too, like that commute that we filmed, especially, that was on a weekend, and that was horrible. I was just like, going with Hank to film him doing that. It was, that day the buses were all messed up, the trains were messed up, so it would have normally been probably maybe 2 hours, ended up being close to 4 hours. And when you're 87 years old, 4 hours on your feet is rough. And then to not only be on your feet, then have to suddenly make a random transfer somewhere in Brooklyn and get on a bus to get another train. It was a real big mess that day, and it was just impressive to see him just keep going on. Like, he didn't complain once, really. I mean, it was horrible that we had all these delays, but he's still standing around waiting for the train and just, doing his drawings and pushing through it.
Now, when you shot that, it was just you and a camera and him, or did you have more of a crew?
I kept it 100% me and him the whole time.
Okay.
There was a few studio interviews I did with like other people where I had someone else with me, but typically it was just me. I kept it as intimate as I could. I wanted it to really be just really between him and I as well. And that's part of the decision also to have the camera directly in front of him and have him looking right into the lens. Because if you ever visit a studio, you'll get the Vergona experience, which is you sit in front of him. You sit in front of the king, you prostrate yourself or whatever it is, and he tells you everything about art. And I wanted that experience kind of be what the viewer gets as well.
Yeah, well, I think that worked really well. You had sort of a miraculous success with when you were shooting on the street and you were shooting on the subway and the other ways of the crowds not getting too much. I mean, I saw one guy who kept looking at the art that he was making, and he saw that you were in the camera. The camera was there, but mostly, by and large, did you have to tell them just act normal, or they just did?
I didn't say anything to them. I didn't bring a tripod or anything. I didn't bring any sound stuff when we did a lot of the outdoor stuff. Some things in Union Square I did have the tripod with, but at that point, it's New York. It's so busy, no one cares.
Right.
But on the subway and anything where we were walking around, I just had the camera in my hand. I kept it really low. I just was as covert as I possibly could be. And even then, like some of the external shots I got in the subway, I actually got stopped a few times by undercover police officers telling me to stop filming. So, yeah, I almost got arrested for this movie. How's that?
Well, there you go. That's dedication. So your uncle talked at one point about trying to capture time. He was always trying to capture these ephemeral aspects of, what is a person's personality from a gesture, from a spontaneous gesture, which is a kind of connection with he sees the person, he gets a sense of something, and he talks about what is it that's brought me at this particular time, at this particular moment in my life, and the particular moment in their life, for me to make this gesture that connects to what's they're feeling, and so forth. So that was just so articulate and so beautiful. But he also talks about capturing time. And I think that one of the great triumphs of the film for me was that you were able to capture time by the different seasons at Union Square and sort of bringing that back. And the music helped to do that too. This is sort of the passage of time. And obviously time is at a premium for him at this point. So when he decides to sign the lease for the next 2 years, was a moment.
That was a critical moment, yeah, because we really weren't sure what we were trying to do. A lot of the family members were like, he's getting pretty old, it's getting tough for him to do this traveling, but he decided to do it. And unfortunately, now it's been a little bit tougher too, because he's had some rough times lately, especially. So it looks like this probably is going to be the end for the studio, unfortunately. We'll see what happens, but we're basically getting prepared as a family now to deal with what's going to happen.
So when did you finish shooting?
Let's see, I think it finished not too long actually after my grandmother passed away. Because originally she was actually in the doc as well. She was kind of a little bit of a subplot I was including in the film. Because she kind of mirrored Hank in a different way. Hank is doing his thing, he's very independent. And after my grandfather passed away, she just kind of was more of a hermit. Like she went to church, that was her thing. But she didn't really go out, she didn't really do much to keep herself going. Whereas Hank is always on the move, always on the go. But unfortunately, I felt like it didn't really work out that much. I don't think really Hank felt it was okay to leave in there either. It made him feel a little bad to see her again in that way. So, yeah,
So you finished what year?
So it was 2016. It's 2018 now, right? Yeah. So I think it was about 2016. I want to say.
Okay.
So yeah, we started not too long actually after I finished the first doc, and I think after we did the first film festival for it. So that was probably summer 2014.
Okay. And how much did you shoot? How many hours did you have?
Way too much. I think I always forget the numbers because there's so many, but just do studio interview alone in the Union Square with him, probably like 30 hours. A lot of footage of him just drawing and painting. Not as much of that as him talking. Like usually I'd go there with my list of questions and I have like 20 questions, but he would just talk and keep going. I'd usually just end up asking only 6 questions in a 3-hour time period.
No, I can understand that.
So it would take many, and sometimes I'd actually just ask the same question again a few months or weeks later to see if I get a different answer out of him. So we had so much footage that got left behind, unfortunately, and I'm hoping one of these days to actually just get it all transcribed and do something with it, because there's so many gems I didn't get to even include in this.
Right, but I mean, even if you ask the same question over and over again, or you only got to ask 1 out of your 20 questions, his ability to, because of his monastic existence maybe, and that hermetic way that he lived, and he talked about it. He said, I have to think, and I need to be able to think without distraction. So, and he's clearly thought out and is thinking all the time about what it is that he's doing, but it's not just thinking, it's from the heart as well. It's interesting to a lot of people in the audience, I'm sure, is the connections to out here. Because of Julie Keyes, shows art out here, and then the Mark Borghi Gallery in Bridgehampton, and then Nathan Slate Joseph, and the rest of the art community out here, Pat Miller, and so forth. So that was.
Mr. Joseph might be here today. Is
he here?
He is here.
He's here. So yeah, so there's a lot of connections to out here from Union Square, I guess because of the Borghi Gallery. So how did that work out? I mean, the first one was because of Bernadette Peters.
Yeah, it was through Bernadette Peters, I guess, getting Hank that gallery, and then that's how I got connected to Julie Keyes, and she allowed me to go film at both those events, which was really great. Those were fun events, and it was just that simple, really.
But the second show came about because of the success of his work at the first show?
I believe so, yeah. She wanted to have him back, and it was that other show was Paul Davis and Jules Pfeiffer, who unfortunately I couldn't get to talk to that day. He was very busy just talking to everybody else. He was a man in high demand that day, especially. So that was a really good show for, I think, all the members of that event.
No, it's great. It was great to see see that connection for us with a Union Square artist to come sort of to make a Hamptons connection. But I found that, I think that's about it for me. If there's a possible question from the audience, I think we have 1 minute, one or two questions.
I love the film. It was so loving and just so intimate, and it was so old-fashioned in a good way. It was like having a conversation with your uncle. It was just beautiful.
Thank you.
But my one question is kind of a logistical thing, being I'm an artist myself. How did he go? He said that he was an illustrator, and then he decided not to be an illustrator and to just paint, but he didn't have huge commercial success as a painter. So how did he support himself all those years?
Saving. He's a very, very frugal man. That's one of the scenes that actually got cut, unfortunately, was kind of showing just how frugal he actually is. What definitely helps that situation is he lived with his brother. So that was in the house that they bought in 1950. So it was essentially paid for. He just pays rent a little bit. And otherwise, I mean, he doesn't really take vacations. I think he told me he only took one vacation his entire life, and that was as a child. And I think they went to like a beach somewhere, and that was it. He's never traveled anywhere else. He just is very frugal, saves his money. And the scene that we got cut ultimately was him in the kitchen making food, and we basically see like how he makes meal prep for a full week, and that could be basically, in this case, his chicken soup, his world famous chicken soup recipe. So he'd get that, he'd make a big pot of that would last him the whole week, and whatever leftover chicken there was would be for chicken salad. So he grew up during the Great Depression, so I think that's something that probably got passed down to him. He kind of learned how to save things and be very frugal, and that's really the biggest thing about that. He still makes sales here and there through things. But ultimately, when you're an artist, that's one of the sacrifices you have to make.
Well, that's incredible. An incredible film. So thank you very much for sharing it with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.